It's the bad craftsman who blames his tools. It's the ear, not the gear. I'm sure you've heard these sayings before, but what if it's both? What if it's the gear and the ear that really make a big difference in the final product? So we're going to explore both of these things in this video. And a big part of this video is showing you how to take a vocal that sounds like this.
In the middle of the night, gazing at the starry sky,
To sounding like this.
Sparkle back in my eye, please remind me.
So strap in. G'day legends. Recently I tracked a song with Kiive and Anna Beaton, two awesome artists, and they're both singing on the same track. Unfortunately, on the day of tracking, Anna was a bit sick and couldn't lay her vocals down. So Kiive tracked her vocals, and she was running through my Latin Audio FC387 into the Great River MP500NV preamp, into our Audioscape Opto, and then into the Focusrite Clarette 8 Pre-X. Roughly that's around a $7,500 Australian dollar vocal chain. And since Anna's not really close to the studio, she tracked her vocals at home using an SM7B into a cloud lifter into a Focusrite Solo. That's roughly a $1,000 to $1,200 signal chain. So there's a big price difference from $7,500 to around $1,200. There's a big gap between. So what does that buy us? Well, I'm going to show you exactly the difference that gets you. So this is Kiive's vocal as it was tracked, no extra processing applied.
I got a couple of skateboards in the back of my car, and they remind me that it's good to be alive. I got a roof over my head.
Sounds awesome. There's a little bit of reverb on there, but there's no EQ or compression or anything like that. That's just as it was tracked. This is how Anna's vocal was delivered as was tracked.
I got a couple of singers in the boot of my car, having a picnic in the middle of the night.
So really big difference. You can hear Kiive's vocal sounds really polished and finished already. And it's helping that we have run it through some compression while we're tracking. But overall, you can hear the EQ of Kiive's voice was way more natural and polished sounding. Whereas you can hear Anna's vocal has way more mid-range in it. It doesn't have that like nice polished finished sound to it. Obviously with the dynamics, it's a bit all over the place because there's no compression on it. And it also just has a kind of muffled quality about it. So we've got two different starting points here. Let's have a listen to Kiive's voice with the mix behind it and just see how it sits in the mix already.
That it's good to be alive. I got a roof over my head. I'm safe and I'm well fed, so please remind me.
It sounds great already. It's got a nice warm character to it, maybe a little bit too much, kind of low end at times, but overall it's sitting in the mix really well. Let's have a listen to where Anna's vocal's sitting at the moment.
In the middle of the night, gazing at the starry sky, sparkle back in my eye, please remind me.
So straight up you can hear this isn't sitting in the mix well at all. It's sort of ducking in and out. There's no clarity to the vocal either, even though at times it's loud enough to cut through. There's just no crispness to the vocal like we hear on Kiive's voice. We can hear all of the S's and T's and like there's a nice bit of air on the vocal already. That's completely missing in this at the moment. Now I know we are comparing a dynamic mic to a condenser mic, so we're going to get a lot more detail from the condenser. But that's something you got to consider in your vocal chain, like when you're looking for the sound and how it's going to work in the production. What's going to be the best thing for you? And I know at home everyone says an SM7B is the best choice for tracking vocals, and it can be in a bad environment, but it can also make a really hard starting point to mix from, especially if you don't know where to go from what you tracked. So obviously here, this is an example where the gear is helping us get to a better starting point for the mix. You can hear Kiive's vocal is 90% of the way there, Anna's vocals about 50% of the way there. So that's what the big price difference has brought us. We are now in a much better point to start our mix and don't have to work as hard. It's already sounding really good. Whereas if you're tracking vocals in a similar chain like Anna, you're going to have to work a little bit harder to get a crisp, clear vocal over the top of your mix. There's going to be a lot more processing applied post. And that's not to say that you can't get the vocal to sound good, because we're going to have a look at that right now. We're going to have a look at how I process this to get them sounding pretty similar. So this is where the ear is going to help. So now check out Anna's vocal after processing.
I got a couple of singers in the boot of my car, having a picnic in the middle of the night.
Sounds sick, right? Sounds great. It's got that same quality that we had on Kiive's vocal. It's cutting through really nice now. Let's flick back to the raw sound.
Gazing at the starry sky, sparkle back in my eye, please remind me when I forget that we have a sun and a shield.
Sounds warm, sounds crisp, sounds clear, sounds like a nice polished vocal now. Now let's have a listen to how it sounds next to Kemi's vocal. There's a really good section up here where they cut line for line against each other. Have a listen to this.
Picking flowers for a friend, sending postcards in the mail.
Laughing when the light turns red, ride my bike 'cause my car battery's dead.
Eating ice cream in the cold,
Running barefoot through the snow.
swimming outside in the rain.
Smiling when you miss your plane.
Make the most.
So it's pretty close now. They're sitting really well next to each other, and in the mix, it sounds good.
Sending postcards in the mail.
Laughing when the light turns red, ride my bike 'cause my car battery's dead.
Eating ice cream in the
So you probably noticed that that word was a little bit louder. I really cranked up the eating because it wasn't cutting through in the mix.
Eating ice cream in the cold.
That one does jump out when you listen in solo, but in the mix, it's fine. Sometimes there's words you gotta really boost up. But you can hear it flows now. The two vocals sound like they were tracked in the same studio pretty much. It doesn't really sound like what we had before where one was really nice and polished and then one had this sort of dark, rolled off, mid-rangey tone about it. It sounds good now. So one more time, no processing, cutting backwards and forwards between the two.
Picking flowers for a friend, sending postcards in the mail.
Laughing when the light turns red, ride my bike 'cause my car battery's dead.
It's crazy. It's a world of difference, and that's what you're paying for with all those big bucks to get this nice gear to deliver a really solid vocal straight into your door to start working with. But that's why people come to a studio, to get a good quality sound. And if you're a studio head and you like getting gear at home, that's why you save up and buy this stuff so that you can get good quality sounds off the get-go and you don't have to work as hard in the box. So let's focus on the ear side of things, because you can hear we got this vocal sounding pretty good next to Kemi's. So we've taken that $1,200 vocal chain and we've pretty much made it sound very close to the $7,500 vocal chain, but it took a bit of extra work. So let's dive into the processing of this vocal. So just a little tip here, whenever I work on vocals, I usually leave the first plugin slot blank. I like to do this in case I need to add something later down the track, like RX mouth declick, which is what I've done here. I put RX mouth declick pretty late in the game because after I started processing and compressing, I really started to hear a lot of mouth sounds, which I found distracting. So I could chuck this at the top of the chain without having to like drag all the plugins down. Even if you need to do some tuning, you can chuck Melodyne at the top of the chain, tune your vocal. You don't have to shuffle all the plugins. So even leaving like 2 blank slots can be a great idea at the top of your vocal chain. So I've got RX7. I'm a couple of versions back, but it still works great anyway. And this just gets rid of all of the annoying little mouth clicks and sounds. So take a look at these settings because this is pretty much just a preset and I load this up and I never change it because it just works really well. And usually I will bounce the vocal in place and just replace the sections where I hear clicks. But for the sake of this video, I've just left it on so you can see what's going on here. So next up, we've got a Logic EQ. We're doing some pretty aggressive moves here to kind of correct all of this mid-range stuff that's going on and try and get the vocal a little bit clearer. So we've got a high pass filter up to 137 Hertz, and then we're cutting at 252 Hertz minus 5.8 dBs. And then we're cutting at 700 Hertz minus 9 dBs. That's pretty massive. And then we're doing a 2.5 dB cut at 1.5K. And then we're doing a boost with a low shelf, 1.7 dBs from around 190 Hertz, just bringing back a little bit of warmth to the vocal. And then a little bit of air boosted at 10K, 5.4 dBs there.
Got a couple of singers in the boot of my car, having a picnic. In the middle of the night, gazing at the starry sky, sparkle back in my eye, please remind me.
So you can hear we've added a whole bunch of detail to it by cutting a bunch of that mid-range, boosting those highs. And even though it sounds a little bit thinner, that's all going to work out in the end. Now let's move on to our next plugin. So a plugin I use pretty often on vocals, the UAD 1176 Rev E. So typically I use this one if I want to thicken the vocal a little bit, add a little bit of saturation with that 1176 sound. 4:1 ratio, slow attack, fast release, pretty much my kind of go-to settings on vocals.
I got a couple of singers in the boot of my car, having a picnic. In the middle of the night, gazing at the starry sky, sparkle back in my eye, please remind me.
So that's definitely helping. The vocal's feeling a lot more even now, and it's adding some nice saturation to it, sort of filling it out a little bit. Now we're going to follow this up with another compressor, the good old LA2A. So the old 76 into the 2A combo never really fails you when you're in need. And basically just trying to get a couple of dBs of gain reduction here.
I got a couple of singers in the boot of my car, having a picnic in the middle of the night.
So now the vocal's feeling pretty solid now. It's keeping very consistent. It doesn't really have the crisp, airy quality that I want out of it just yet. So let's have a look at what we do next. Running into VMR. So I've added a 1073 preamp emulation here just to try and add a bit of color to it. And then we've got VCC with the Brit N, which again kind of adds some thickness to the lows and a little bit of color to the high end. It's an interesting setting, that one. And then we're cutting some more mids, 600 Hertz, boosting a little bit of 4K, boosting a little bit of 12K, and boosting some 200 Hertz. These are all like 1 dB moves. And then we've got a high pass filter up to 200 Hertz. I think this is like a 6 dB octave, so it's a pretty gentle high pass filter. And that's just controlling the low end a little bit more. And then just a de-esser on the end, the FG-DS. Got that set at 3.2K, and then just getting anywhere between like 1 to 8 dBs of gain reduction usually.
In the middle of the night, gazing at the starry sky, sparkle back in my eye, please remind me when I forget.
So you can hear it's just adding a little bit of extra edge to the vocal. It sounds cool. Now I know I've done this in a couple of videos and it's definitely not my typical thing, but when I have a vocal that I find a little difficult, I always end up trying like the Wave CLA vocal, and it usually just does something. Like there's a little EQ curve in it, or there's like the way the compression sounds. It usually just gives it that finished sound for me. So we've got the CLA vocals and we're boosting the bite a tiny bit, around 2 dBs of that. We're cutting the lower frequency, so around 0.7 dBs of that. And then we're using the wall limiter and then a tiny bit of slap and a bit of stereo chorus on the vocals.
Gazing at the starry sky, sparkle back in my eye, please remind me.
I don't know if it's just like that extra bit of compression or whatever it is. Maybe that little bit of slap delay in there in the chorus. Like it just gives it a really nice finished sound. You know that that vocal is going to sit in the mix and it's not going anywhere. And it's just got that airy detail about it now too, which I really like. And then we're following this up with Pro and B just to do a little bit of multiband compression to rein in a little bit of harshness at times. So we've brightened the vocal up. We've got it sounding nice and clear, but now we also need to make sure that that brightness doesn't translate into harshness as well. So at times, some things might sound a little brittle. So using a bit of multiband compression can kind of clamp down on those moments and just smooth it out a bit. So we got one at 3K. This is kind of grabbing the harsher, more brittle frequencies I was talking about. And then we've got another band at 7K, which is kind of acting like a de-esser again. And both of these are on fast attack, fast release. And the range is set to around minus 10 dBs.
I got a couple of singers in the boot of my car, having a picnic in the middle of the night.
It sounds nice, warming it up a little bit, just making sure nothing gets too abrasive. And then to finish it off, just one more Logic EQ, just doing some really small moves, basically a 1 dB cut at 610 Hertz, just kind of some honky mid-range. I know it's an annoying term, but that's just how I kind of describe that sound. And then we also are just doing a 1 dB cut at 3.5K just to, again, pull in that sort of edgy sound of the vocal and just help it sort of sound a bit more airy, because then it accentuates the higher frequencies because we're cutting those upper mids. And then I've just given it like a half dB boost to compensate for these changes.
In the middle of the night, gazing at the starry sky, sparkle back in my eye, please remind me.
It's pretty subtle, but to me, it helps a little bit. Sometimes it's all these little micro moves that we make that kind of make up the big picture. When you jump back to the original sound, you go, wow, we've come a long way. This actually does sound dramatically different, even though they're all little things along the way. I know there's been a couple of big things, especially that first EQ was really dramatic, but the rest has been kind of just pretty typical stuff. So one more time, before and after.
I got a couple of singers in the boot of my car, having a picnic in the middle of the night, gazing at the starry sky, sparkle back in my eye, please remind me
So it sounds great now, and it's a really good vocal performance, a really good delivery. So it's great that we can make it sound that way as well. But if Anna hadn't been sick and she could have tracked her vocals here, it would have been a similar starting point to where Kemi's vocal was, and then it wouldn't have needed such dramatic processing to get it to sound a bit more polished and sit in the mix better. So that's where the ear comes into play. Yes, having good gear gives you a much easier starting point, but if you have a good ear, you can take something that's not ideal and you can still make it sound great in the mix. And this isn't like a copy paste, like you can take this chain and put it on and it's going to magically fix any vocal that doesn't sound pristine. It's definitely a good chain and a good starting point, but that first EQ, for example, would probably have to be quite dramatic from vocal to vocal because every vocal sounds different. There's going to be different areas in the EQ that would need to be cut or boosted to correct the problems. So let's quickly take a look through Kemi's vocal chain. We'll move through this one pretty quickly. First off, a bit of EQ, doing a 1 dB cut with a wide bell at 300 Hertz, and then a 1 dB high shelf cut at 8K. Basically just pulling a little bit of that thickness out of the vocal and then just cooling the top end down a little bit.
I got a couple of skateboards in the back of my car.
This frequency range can really make the mix get muddy.
And they remind me that it's good to be alive.
It's definitely a tricky area because when you cut it, you feel like, oh, I'm taking like some warmth and body out of the vocal. And then you go listen to it in the car and you're like, I could have cut a lot more out of that. So it's one of those tricky areas where you got to find that balance between warmth in a vocal and clarity. Then we've got the Kiive Audio Tube KC1, been loving this on vocals at the moment.
I got a couple of skateboards in the back of my car, and they remind me that it's good to be alive.
Got the mix knob at around 60% because we already have some compression on the way in and I didn't want to kind of overcook it. And then following it up with VMR, we've got the VCC on the Brit end channel, same as what we had on Anna's vocal, and then a small cut at 400 Hertz, about 1.5 dBs, and then a half dB boost at 4K and a 2.8 dB boost at 12K, so adding a little bit of air and presence to it. And again, just cutting a little bit more of that low mids out. High pass filter up to 90 Hertz. This probably isn't really doing that much, to be honest, but just putting it there just to cut any potential rumbles in the low end. And then the 902 FG de-esser again.
And they remind me that it's good to be alive. I got a roof over my head. I'm safe and I'm well fed.
It's giving the vocal some cut. It's helping it cut through the mix and just sit at the front. Next up, we've got Pro Q3, just a little bit more EQ, just doing a 1.6 dB cut at 200 Hertz. Just obviously felt like I still need to pull a little bit of low mid out of the vocal, just where it's sort of maybe getting a little muddy at times. And then we have a serious bit of dynamic EQ here at around 2K. There was probably like a spiky frequency somewhere in the track that was jumping out and getting like whistly and annoying. So I put that there to kind of rein that in at times. And then there's another bit of dynamic EQ at 3.6K, kind of a wideish bell, but it does go deep around 6 dBs, and that's just grabbing sort of harshness in the vocal.
I got a couple of skateboards in the back of my car, and they remind me that it's good to be alive. I got a roof over my head.
Sounds nice. Just sort of reins in at those times when things get a little peaky, and it makes the air of the vocal stand out a bit more as well. CLA vocals again, similar thing, just cutting a tiny bit of lows, tiny little boost to the top, not really much, 0.2. We've got the wall compressor, but not hitting it as hard. Bit of slap, and then a bit of stereo chorus on the vocal as well.
I got a couple of skateboards in the back of my car.
Just gives it that nice bit of polish on the end. I'm liking what that does. I always feel guilty about using that plugin. Like it just feels like a hack, but I don't know. It sounds good. It sounds good. And then finishing off with a little bit of multi-band compression, similar to kind of what we had on Anna's vocal. This is at around 2.9K on the first band, and the second band is around 6.6K. Again, fast attack, fast release, and these are just grabbing when things jump out.
I got a couple of skateboards in the back of my car, and they remind me that it's good to be alive. I got a roof over my head.
Adding some nice warmth to the vocal. Overall, the vocal is going to be a little bit brighter, a little bit more compressed now, and we've just made sure it hasn't gotten harsh as well. Let's hear it before and after.
I got a couple of skateboards in the back of my car, and they remind me that it's good to be alive. I got a roof over my head.
So you can hear we've taken a little bit of like the woolly sound out of the vocal, like that low mid, that kind of makes it sit in the mix with a bit of a muddy sound at times. This is going to just make the vocal sit a little bit crisper, a little bit more forward, and cut through a little bit better. It gives us that nice airy detail to the top end. So not as dramatic as a change as Anna's vocal, but enough of a change to make it sit in the mix just that little bit better.
I got a couple of skateboards in the back of my car, and they remind me that it's good to be alive. I got a roof over my head.
So to me, that little bit of low mid, even though it's like this nice warm sound, it's a little murky at times, and now we've just made the vocal crisp. So is it the gear or is it the ear that makes the biggest difference? And I honestly think it's both. Having good gear and a good ear is great. Having good gear and a bad ear could lead to bad decisions later, which will make what sounded great sound bad in the mix. Having average gear but a good ear, you'll still be able to pull good results in a mix. But having average gear and an average ear will probably result in an average sounding mix as well. So the ear to me is probably the most important thing, being able to take a sound and make it sound great. Having the good gear is definitely a plus, but as you can see, we can still get things to work really well if you know what you're doing. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Hit that like button if you did, and subscribe to the channel if you want to support this channel. Check out the description link below. Head over to my website and grab a sample pack or a mixing course. There's a bunch of stuff over there for you to check out. Grabbing any of that stuff is a massive support. If you buy your gear online and you do it through Sweetwater, check out the affiliate link below. If you click on that link and buy some gear, a small commission from the sale comes back to this channel. It doesn't cost you anything extra, but it's just an awesome way of showing your support. If you're looking for a really lush, beautiful sounding reverb, check out this next video where I did a demo of Half Light's tape spacers.